Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take the March 2025 astrology through the signs to see, based on your rising sign, how this month is going to be affecting you personally. So I've already done a major forecast for the month, but I wanted to take this through the signs. So we'll be looking at the most significant elements of March 2025 in your chart here. So what we'll mostly be looking at is the Pisces and Aries houses in your chart, because those are going to be getting highlighted in multiple ways pretty strongly. So we'll look at that. We'll look at the retrogrades of Venus and Mercury in Aries here. Where do we go? Right here. And then we will look at how that's going from Aries back into Pisces. So it's going to be hitting up two different houses in your chart. We'll also look at the lunar eclipse in Virgo, and we'll look at the solar eclipse in Aries, as well as taking into consideration the fact that Neptune is going into Aries at the end of the month. However, I'm also going to be uploading this weekend a video where I take Neptune and Aries through the signs in more depth, so we won't get too far into this. We'll just keep it in mind and mention it for everyone. Before we dive into it, if you are new here, please do consider sticking around by subscribing for future videos about forecasts like this through the signs, as well as geopolitical and political astrology. And if you don't mind giving the video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. I will also be announcing the winner of the Chart Your Destiny giveaway on March 1st, so keep an eye for that as well. But without any further ado, let's dive into it. Okay, so for Aries Rising, we have some major stuff going on for you. We are going to be having a solar eclipse in your first house. This is going to be the last one of a series that started in 2023. So this is going to be wrapping up a major period of change for you. And this can really put the cherry on top. This can be the kind of final bit of that transformation that you'll be going through at the end of this month. That eclipse, that solar eclipse, is going to be taking place right at the end of the month there. It's also going to be just before Neptune enters your first house. This is going to also be very huge for you. This is going to bring a lot more spiritual, idealistic, optimistic, belief-oriented energy to you, to your personality. And it can be a bit confusing, but it's also very heartening to have Neptune moving into your first house. Like I said, we'll get more into that in the next video, but I did definitely want to mention that. Now, throughout the month, what you're dealing with is more along the lines of addressing your routines, your mundane routines, and then looking at that from the perspective of Pisces, which is your 12th house. So looking at your daily life from a perspective of, does this work for me with my values? Is this psychologically or emotionally healthy for me? So there's going to be a lot of working through some subconscious baggage, potentially conditioning questions, patterns, things like this that have kind of built up over time and that you basically function with habitually, with the axis of your 6th house and your 12th being highlighted this month. So wonderful time to streamline your life, focus again on what truly matters, and not just from a materialistic perspective or viewpoint there. Also, a really excellent time to look at your health, letting go of outdated habits potentially and also like outdated conditioning. So habits that are subconscious or habits that are a part of your daily life. So not just your physical health, but also, again, your psychological and emotional health. And this is going to wind up feeding into that eclipse that we have at the end of the month in your first house as well. The more work that you can do on this area of your personal internal health, your personal internal compass, and allowing for that to take a very important role in your daily life is just going to set you up all the much better for that big eclipse that you're going to have in your first house there. So I would personally recommend, to the extent that you're able, you're probably going to wind up being a little busier than you would like this month because of this lunar eclipse that's coming up in your sixth house. But I would personally recommend trying to take as much time to think, to work through things internally rather than trying to load up your schedule this month. When we start to get really more into Aries season, when we start to get more of these placements moving on into Aries and beyond, that's probably going to be a better time to initiate things anyway. As I mentioned, I don't love the end of the month, even really the middle to the end of the month, for initiating things because of this alignment that we have here. And for you, this is going to be quite personal. It's going to be speaking to changes and possibly like major adjustments that are necessary that feel a bit off or a little bit awkward, where you're having to address deep personal security questions, questions about patterning from your childhood and how those have played into your habits and whether or not those are healthy. So that's more so, again, what I would be focusing on this month rather than initiating things. Because the issue with initiating things during periods of time like this is that it pulls all of that awkward kind of energy into the future. It infuses whatever it is that you're starting with that kind of an underlying energy. So I would watch out for that a bit. And I would really work on internal stuff. And then right there at the end of the month, you're looking at that solar eclipse, which is to say, of course, we're in Aries season then, so we at least have that moving on. Mercury and Venus are going to be bringing up personal questions for you, and then going retrograde back into that subconscious to dig through that. So again, is this working for me? Well, let me look at it. Let me dig it up. Let me consider it. And then having done so, let me then move forward and bring those lessons from the subconscious back into the conscious. So this is a really sensitive point between our 12th and first houses. So this retrograde is going to be very important for you. We will have Venus and Mercury simultaneously retrograde through this area. And then, of course, like I said, right on the heels of a lot of this changing signs, the sun, Venus, and Mercury, then we have Neptune moving in here. So this is all speaking to a much bigger, broader reorientation for you that Neptune is bringing in. And yeah, we will go further into that in the next video. So thank you so much. That is what I have for you, Aries Rising, for March 2025. Okay, so for Taurus Rising, we are going to be having a lunar eclipse in your fifth house, which is quite nice. We're going to be having a solar eclipse in your 12th house, which is speaking to subconscious patterning, questions of emotional and psychological well-being, and what's kind of going on behind the scenes for you. We're also getting a big retrograde of Mercury and Venus simultaneously from your 12th house into your 11th. So this could for sure be a decent time for you to look at how friends, allies, groups that you're involved with, how they play into how you're feeling subconsciously. And that can go a couple of different ways, but I'll give a couple of examples. So for instance, if you typically keep those kinds of questions to yourself about how you perceive of things on an internal level, on a below the surface level subconsciously, to put it in one word, then if you keep that to yourself pretty often, this could be a really wonderful time for you to talk those things over with friends specifically, and see if you can get some feedback that when you're then able to go back into that alone space, that internal space, that you can notice some major wonderful changes, some really good movement, some shaking loose of patterns and habits of thinking that may have stood rigid for a while just because they haven't really been addressed for a long time. So that's going to be one way that this could play out wonderfully and significantly for you. But another way that this could play out, and you'll definitely know your situation. Basically, all that this is saying for a Taurus rising is, okay, these areas of your life are going to be overlapping and feeding into each other. So another way that this could play out, possibly a little bit less wonderful and magical, but friends and groups that you're involved in could have you reinforcing some habits of thought that you already engage in, or they could even be creating those for you. So for instance, if you belong to certain groups where some members seem to be pretty judgmental, and you aren't usually that way, but you're finding yourself needing to edit yourself, needing to watch out for stepping on toes, things along these lines. I'm sure you know what I mean. You may find that when you interact with them, and I would recommend interacting with them as a practice this month of really looking at it during those retrogrades and seeing it for what it is, rather than doing that completely internally. But then when you step out of that and go back into your kind of personal space, your home, where you're thinking it through, you're likely to get some really profound insights about that. And you may wind up deciding that that's something you ultimately want to step away from. And that would make sense, because one of the things that we're also going to be dealing with here is that Neptune's moving from Pisces into Aries during this time. And so what that says about your 11th house, where Neptune has been since 2011, is that you're on the back end of that transit, which is to say that transit is in a space that it's been for plenty long. It's brought up what it needed to bring up. It has introduced what it needed to introduce, and it's wearing out its welcome to an extent. So there could be some really wonderful friends or groups that you have become more involved with since 2011 that it served its purpose. And I hate to be a little bit callous about that, but what this Neptune is going to be doing as it moves into your 12th house, it's actually a pretty decent place for Neptune to be, with some caveats. And we'll get more into that in the next video when I take Neptune and Aries specifically through the signs. But this can have you understanding on more of an instinctual or an intuitive level what it is that's going on for you personally. So this is likely to make you a lot more sensitive, pretty much across the board, to negative energies, negative influences, also to positive energies and positive influences. It can pull you toward those, and that can be really wonderful as well. But as far as things that are not the most healthy for you, it may not be completely rationally apparent, but it's very likely then to be something that you just feel. So definitely, I will say, in the coming years, try not to gaslight yourself about how you're feeling. Follow your instincts for sure, because that's how you're going to be able to tap into that Neptune there. But ultimately, we are dealing with, for you, Taurus Rising, during this month, again, major questions about who it is that you at least treat like or perceive as your friends and those that you're connected to. And so I think that that's just feeding into questions of whether that's healthy or not. I, again, would not recommend not interacting with a lot of people. I think you're actually kind of being asked to do so in this month. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities along those lines as well, because we're going to have so much action in this area throughout the month. These two, like I said, they're going to be moving back into Pisces. Not long after that, the sun will move out of this area, but then we're still dealing with Saturn, the North Node, Neptune. The North Node is still pretty new to Pisces because it moves backwards. So this hasn't been here for very long, just about a month. And I think there's definitely going to be some opportunities for you. But then also when we're looking at the the full moon eclipse in your fifth house, that's also going to be asking you questions about what it is that you genuinely enjoy. What do you enjoy? Not what do you feel like the outside world would say that you should enjoy, or, you know, I'm sure you understand what I mean by that. So that's also then calling a bit into question any sort of alliances or associations that you have that you don't. And that should be also then especially apparent to you during that lunar eclipse that's going to be taking place in the middle of the month as well. Also, one thing that I've been mentioning, I mentioned this in the forecast for the month, but I also want to mention it here just in case anyone misses that video, is that the solar eclipse that we're going to be seeing in Aries, it will be taking place in the context of a minor grand trine that I'm not the most thrilled with. And so I would not super recommend, at least after that lunar eclipse mid-month period, so later in the month, I would not recommend initiating things, because one of the things that we can do when we initiate something is we're kind of planting seeds, and those seeds have the energy, the mark, the stamp, basically, of the period of time in which they are initiated. And this minor grand trine here requires intense adjustment, and not the most comfortable adjustments either. For you, for better or worse, this is taking place in these more extroverted placements of Uranus having been in your first house for years now, since 2018. That is in a sextile to Saturn, which is in your 11th and has been since 2023. And then this big Mars retrograde that we've just been through and has just wrapped up, that's on the other side of this. So that's trine to that Saturn and sextile to that Uranus. And this just looks like a bit of a I hate to put it in this way, but I genuinely feel like it's a bit of a yucky adjustment that we have to make, something we don't necessarily love to do. And for you, this is really pointing to you and what you want, and liberating yourself from any sort of shackles that you feel belong to others, that others have imposed on you to an extent, those lines in which you remain, that box in which you've been put and within which you feel restricted, but also like that's kind of the extent to which you're able to move with. Now, hopefully over the past several years since 2018, that's been something that you've been working on, but just because it's something you're working on doesn't mean that the process is over, of course. And so I feel like something like that is coming up for you this month again, where you're asking these questions about the health of the environment for you. And so I wouldn't be shy about being a little bit self-oriented during this period of time, just because that's where your best answers are going to be coming in for you, is how does this make me feel? So I would definitely wind up tapping into that during this period of time for Taurus Rising. Let's just look through this real quick. So yeah, focus on creativity, joy, and your social connections. Creativity and joy is going to be brought up sharply in the middle of the month by that lunar eclipse in Virgo, as well as questions along the lines of self-expression, passion projects, encouraging you to release any limiting beliefs about your talents or your worth, especially as imposed by society or people that you know. So letting go of what's holding you back, embracing your personal unique gifts here. And the solar eclipse in Aries is, again, energizing this area of your subconscious, of your spiritual connection. And it's asking you, again, to surrender those kind of old patterns and embrace a deeper sense of purpose. This is the last of the solar eclipses, or the eclipses generally speaking, in Aries that we're getting. The North Node defines where we get eclipses, and we are clipping Aries with one last one, even though the nodal axis has moved on. So basically, that is to say, this has been a process since 2023 that you've been working on. This is the final one. And often when we see the final eclipse of a series, it does tend to be very significant because it's really putting a bow on the changes that have been made. And that's going to be to your subconscious here. And again, questions about patterns, because the eclipses have been around the 6th, 12th axis for you. So it's really bringing into question, again, the matter of health of your patterning, of your conditioning. So yeah, surrendering old patterns, embracing a deeper sense of purpose, and then yeah, highlighting friendships and community, nurturing connections, leaning on your support system. But again, don't be shy to question these things, not necessarily to people's faces. I don't think that this is calling for confrontation at all. But when you're in your alone time, think those things through. How are they making you feel? You are being called to do that because of the fact that these planets are going retrograde. A big time rethink potential miscommunications and things along these lines with Mercury retrograde in this area. And there could be some misunderstandings that wind up arising, but it is calling into question, how much are you enjoying these relationships? How healthy are they for you? Are they enjoyable anymore? You are being called to reconsider that with those retrogrades there. So yeah, collaboration and shared dreams also being very, very strongly highlighted this month with a lot of action in your 11th house there. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus Rising. Thank you so much for being here. So for Gemini Rising, we have a lot of action going on in your 10th house of career and life direction, your reputation, your legacy. And so that's going to be something that's really important for you during this month. We're also then going to get a lunar eclipse in your 4th house, which is bringing up questions about home and family patterns along those lines. And then we're getting a big retrograde from Venus and Mercury together going retrograde in Aries, and then pulling that energy back into the 10th house, and then finally moving on to the 11th. At the very end of the month, then we also have Neptune going into your 11th house. So that's something that we'll need to keep in mind. We'll go deep into that in the next video when I specifically take Neptune and Aries, which we're going to be dealing with for the coming decade and a half when I take that through the signs. But let's get into this. So a major focus and very likely to be shifts along the lines of your home and career life. The lunar eclipse in Virgo is going to be taking place in the middle of the month, and it's urging release. This is both a full moon eclipse, but it's also in the area where we have the south node rather than the north node. So this is a kind of double up on the request to release things. So emotional baggage, outdated family dynamics, patterns and things that you've picked up on from your roots or your ancestry. If it is helpful and if it's healthy, then that's wonderful. But anything that is restricting you where you're able to feel comfortable in your home and family life or out in the public sphere when it comes to your career and so on, if there have been patterns that have arisen from family patterns that are now impacting your, say, extroversion or your ability to go after what it is that you want in the working world. Say, if there was a lot of critique in your childhood and you therefore feel that you're uncomfortable with speaking up in your working environment, and therefore maybe you even feel like you miss out on promotions, things along these lines, then that would be something that it would be wonderful to really set your intentions on releasing around the middle of the month here. We'll get more opportunities. This is the first Virgo eclipse that we're getting, and we'll get a few others in the coming 16 months or so. We therefore then have a focus also on the renewal and health of your home environment. That will be something to keep in mind. You for sure could wind up moving in the coming, like I said, it's more like 18 months that we're going to be having eclipses along the lines of Pisces and Virgo here. So I would expect some major shifts along these lines. We're just now easing into this period of time. So it might not happen quite now, but if these ideas start to arise in your head, that's very natural. It's very normal. That is something you're called to at least consider for now, if not actually making those changes. So the solar eclipse, though, is going to be bringing up questions of alliances, friendships, the networks and groups that you belong to, and how is it that you can kind of renew those once and for all for a while? How is it that you can invest in that and get the best out of that? So if you have been feeling like maybe your friendships have gone a bit stagnant, or maybe you have felt like the social and working networks that you have around you have gone a bit stale, it would be a wonderful time to reach out and see which ones of those connections you want to continue to feed into here. The reason I mentioned that as a kind of once and for all thing, this is the last eclipse that we're getting in Aries. Like I said, the nodal axis has just shifted. And so we're catching one more in Aries here, one more solar eclipse. And so this is really putting a bow on that whole series that we've been dealing with for the past year and a half. This is our last opportunity, at least, to use an eclipse along these lines. But we will have Neptune and Saturn moving into this house. So it's going to be a different dynamic going forward. And if we want to deal with the kind of a little bit more straightforward energy of an eclipse than, say, a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which we'll talk about here shortly in a few weeks or so, then this would be the time to do it. Because this area of our lives, I'm also a Gemini rising, it's about to get a little bit complicated when it comes to friends and groups and things like this. So not bad, but there's more layers and there's more complexities that we're dealing with. So definitely be open to unexpected connections. These are also likely people that are going to be helping you with that conjunction that we'll be experiencing in that house. So definitely be open. Also, then we have Pisces season. Like I said, major focus on your 10th house here. There could be some pretty interesting career developments. I would not be too terribly upset or taking it personally if in the beginning of the month, it looks like things are going one way, and then later in the month, it looks like there's been a bit of an about face. This is a time of major transition in the world, broadly speaking. And so I think when it comes to employment situations, it's going to be a bit up in the air. And so people are going to be very tentative about making major decisions. So for instance, if you are up for a raise or a promotion and it takes longer than expected, I wouldn't take it personally. We have these retrogrades coming back into this area. Plus, we still have Saturn here. So all of this indicates delays. And like I said, I wouldn't take it personally. I also wouldn't think that this is something that will ultimately wind up falling through. I think that this is something that will wind up coming to fruition, but probably not this month, probably, let's say May, because then we'll have these two having moved on, and Saturn then will be moving into the 11th. It'll be moving out of that 10th house. So April, May timeframe looks a little bit more straightforward, and like movement would be more possible along those lines. One thing we have to keep in mind, and we'll go into this a little bit more for you guys because this is an important area for you, is that these are not, it's not like, oh, there's a bunch going on and it's super lighthearted in your career. It's relatively dense like I said, complex, intricate energies that are coming up. Saturn brings a huge amount of density. That's what you've been dealing with since March of 23, having this in the 10th house in Pisces here. The North Node doesn't necessarily dense up the energy. It actually makes things a little bit sharper, but it is very consequential. And so having that in the 10th house does indicate major consequential shifts and changes in your career, usually for the better when we're dealing with the North Node. And then Neptune has been here for ages, leading you in all different kinds of directions, making this area a little bit difficult to pin down in terms of the direction that you're going in. And it's saying a lot of its last words around this time. And so that anaretic degree is really no joke, especially when we're dealing with an outer planet. This is representing, and we'll get this once more when Neptune retrogrades later in the year back into Pisces, and it'll just stay at 29 degrees. This is really the culmination of all of the lessons that Neptune has brought us about remaining open, about going along different interesting detours and collecting different skills and perspectives along the way that ultimately wind up serving us. But also, Venus and Mercury are lovely. They're very lighthearted, generally speaking, but they're going to be in retrograde for a lot of this. And what they're bringing up is questions even potentially about colleagues and networking and things like this. So that's where a lot of these questions are going to be coming up. And like I said, it's not just going to be easy, clear answers, but the grace with which you can handle this during this month, keeping in mind that Saturn tends to be nicest to us, or at least less jerky, put it that way, to us when we're putting in that good, clean effort. So despite any weirdness, despite any confusion, I'm telling you, it's going to become more clear in a couple of months. Keep putting in that effort, keep plugging away at this area, and it's likely to go actually pretty extraordinarily well with the movement that we have in this area for you. So yeah, thinking a lot is wonderful during this time, because having these two in retrograde is going to lead you to some decent solutions after you think something up, look at it from a different perspective, start to put a little bit of action toward maybe a new direction, whether it be research or something like this, whether it be connecting with new people and so on. There's an excellent reorientation, but think it through. There's definite good solutions here. It's just that we're not likely to see outcomes or results of that quite yet. So focusing on long-term goals here, not short-term wins. And yeah, this is summing up about 10 minutes of my blabbing. Trust that your efforts are building towards something meaningful, that they are creating the clarity and the movement that you're looking for. You're not going to see it quite yet, but you will, I trust, in a few months' time here. So definitely keep plugging away. So yeah, that I think is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini Rising, for March of 2025. Okay, so for Cancer Rising, we have a lunar eclipse taking place in your third house here. We have a big jumble of planets bringing up a lot of questions in your ninth house. We're going to have a solar eclipse in your 10th house, and all of this is leading up into Neptune moving from your ninth into your 10th house here. So what does all of this mean? Communication and learning are going to be really important during this period of time, as are beliefs. And you're rethinking the way that you approach these things, your beliefs, your opinions about the world, about philosophy, these kind of big questions around what are your horizons? What is it that you understand? What is within the view of your perspective? What is it that you're actually really taking into consideration when it comes to your beliefs? So that's coming up really big for you this month. There's a a big rethink around how you have prepared yourself in your career for the steps that you're wanting to take going forward. And I would definitely recommend thinking about that because you're likely to come to some really wonderful solutions, probably not this month, but in the coming months, there should be some movement along those lines. So we have Mercury and Venus are going to both simultaneously retrograde in Aries, and then they will both move into Pisces, and then they'll wind up going direct and they'll move back into Aries. So this is going along the 10th house of your career, your reputation, your legacy, your working life, your public sphere reputation there. And then your 9th house of, again, what led into your career path. How is it that that continually sets you up? But then also your values, your beliefs, and whether that be about the world and the prospects of the world, or especially in a time like this where things are a bit up in the air, what is it that you think is possible? Is that being limited by the weirdness of what we're seeing right now and the adjustments that are going to be necessary for us to make? Try not to get too boxed in by that. And I think that Venus and Mercury moving back into that house, even though in retrograde, they can actually take a bit more of a tack of let's plan around like a scarcity kind of perspective on things. Once they get going direct, they're really unloading a lot of solutions for you around this area. So they should be actually lightening that energy up ultimately, but probably more so along the lines of later in the month there. So we'll also then have a solar eclipse in your 10th house of career. So this could indicate a shifting point. It's the last eclipse in along the Aries Libra axis that we have been having ongoing since 2023. So the last eclipse in a series like that, it does tend to have a lot more oomph to it. So if there's been interesting shifts and changes that have been going on with regard to your career and home recently, like in the past year and a half or so, it's likely that if you've been delaying on anything along those lines, it's likely that that comes to a bit of a head late this month here. And because of the fact that that solar eclipse is coinciding with these retrogrades here, I really would not be surprised if that is a reorientation again in order to align you better with a path that feels more authentic to you. So, for instance, if you have certain beliefs about things, but your working life hasn't really been very in alignment with that because we need to pay the bills and things like this, then this can have you, especially if you've been shifting more in that direction and questioning that recently, this can really be that final push along those lines to feel more at home, more authentic, more aligned with your career path, generally speaking. So yeah, to summarize this, communication and learning, taking center stage with the lunar eclipse in your 3rd house. This is bringing up those questions about how you communicate with others, how they communicate with you, and relationships with siblings and neighbors and people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. That's likely to be taking up a lot of your focus in the middle of the month. But much more broadly speaking, what you're dealing with here is questions around your routines and how they serve you, rethinking your approach to that schedule, to those habits that come up in the 3rd house here because of the opposition then inherent to everything that is going on in Pisces, to that lunar eclipse there. You're being asked to release what's going on here, which is those daily habits, potentially some people even that maybe you'll want to spend a little bit less time with if you feel like you are limiting yourself in terms of your own authenticity in order to suit them. And again, that could totally be playing into those questions around your career as well. So yeah, releasing limiting thought patterns, embracing a more kind of intentional approach when it comes to your routines, rather than being on autopilot or feeling like, well, these are people that I have to be dealing with. This is a career I have to be dealing with. It looks to me like there's a shift along those lines where that might not be the case anymore. And so releasing those limiting thought patterns can be very helpful for you to recognize that and then to solve for that in your life in this upcoming, I would say, few months, honestly. So the solar eclipse in Aries, bringing up ambitions, growth in your career, public life, bold goals, inspired action. Again, this is about what is it that you really want when it comes to your career. This is your reputation. It's your legacy. So boxing yourself in is going to feel really wrong during this time. And I think that's actually really good. It's going to push you to expand your horizons here. So again, exploring new perspectives, travel potential, and higher learning. Now, higher learning for sure in terms of college, but again, it's more along the lines of taking a much broader perspective on things than the relatively myopic patterns that we can get into in the third house, where again, we can function on autopilot because it's what's comfortable. This is generally speaking our comfort zone, our locality, our neighborhood, the people and things that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. Are you able to push yourself outside of that, even if it's on a mental or intellectual or perspective, worldview, belief system basis, to reach for more and more broadly for yourself in this time? So yeah, definitely trust your intuition as you are exploring these things. The answers might not be completely rational. They'll probably be relatively reasonable. At least it's not like you're not seeing reality correctly in this period of time. We will have those retrogrades, but really those are doing more to ask questions. And there could be some confusion also with the fact that they do have to pass Neptune here. But I feel like by the end of the month, you're more clear about things. I feel like in terms of taking action toward what it is that you're figuring out for yourself around this period of time, that's likely to be in a couple months here. Then at the end of the month, what we're dealing with is Neptune moving into Aries. That's going to be moving into your 10th house. And this does represent a pretty big shift that's going to be slow going. It's not going to be the most noticeable or loud thing that you're dealing with, but that's that big vision. That's those bold goals. That's that inspired action that you're taking toward the legacy that it is that you want. That's what Neptune's going to be bringing up. And we'll go much more into that in the Neptune in Aries through the signs video that I'm going to be publishing right after this one. So I won't go too far into that, but do understand that like all of this that you're doing, all this big rethink, this whole working around your routine, releasing these patterns and releasing the autopilot, releasing the constraints that you may feel from your environment upon yourself, it's really setting you up for Neptune moving into that 10th house there. And Saturn's going to double down on that later as well. I super won't go into that very far because that's going to be a couple months' time here before it even starts doing that. But suffice it to say, in the coming years, getting really, really serious and focused on what are those big goals that you have and what are the steps, the constructive steps that you can take toward that end and doing that. So it looks really good, but there's just going to be some interesting big questions that you're dealing with this month when it comes to your career and preparing yourself to take that a step further in this time. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer Rising. So for Leo Rising, we have a lunar eclipse taking place in your 2nd house. We have a major pileup in your 8th house here, and then we'll have a solar eclipse in your 9th house, which is quite lovely. And we will also have Mars still moving through the sector of your 12th house, but we'll mention that in a moment here. So, what does this all mean? We have a lot that is going on financially for you right now around questions of resources and security. I will say off the bat, just in case I forget, because I don't think I necessarily wrote it here, this is our first of many eclipses along this axis here of the second house, which is your finances, your resources, your security, your income, also your values come up here, and especially your values and your beliefs with regard to yourself. So how do you value yourself? And then the eighth house, which is usually referred to as representing other people's resources, but it's more than that. It's more along the lines of how you entwine with other people. What impact do other people have on you and your sense of security, your sense of standing, your sense of self-worth? And so that's why we can sometimes get weird power dynamics and things like this that play out along these lines. And if this sounds to you like something that is very annoying because it's something that you have been dealing with quite a bit recently, I do have some good news, which is to say, after we get this pile up here, which I think is actually going to be pretty helpful to sorting a lot of that out that has been going on in recent years, this year you're actually getting these two big heavy hitters that have been raising a lot of complications and questions in this area of your life around power dynamics and dependencies and things like this. They'll be finally moving on. And that is, of course, very welcome. So let's get more into this. We're going to have two big retrogrades of Venus and Mercury happening right around the same time, starting right around the same point of about 9-10 degrees of Aries, and then moving back into Pisces. And so they're moving from your ninth house into your eighth. And that brings it ties those houses together in terms of what the retrograde means for you. So there's questions around potentially the restrictions that you feel are placed upon your ability to expand your horizons based on your entanglements with others. So that can definitely be something that is coming up for you. There could be also a very tight relationship that you're in that is impacting your beliefs and your worldview, even like your opinions on things. So there's a lot of discussion and kind of a interaction, discourse around these questions for you in your very close relationships. And it's going to be something about, again, when we're looking at expanding horizons versus dependencies, those do pull in different directions. So I think there's something about the bit of a contradiction between these houses that will be coming up for you around this period of time. You'll also then wind up at the very end of the month with a solar eclipse in this ninth house. And so also because of the fact that this retrograde, it goes back into Pisces and then finally it'll move on back into Aries and will continue to move forward. I feel like there's an extent to which you are at least expressing the need in your relationships to throw off some shackles. And if this is even maybe something that you're doing on a personal level, but you're evaluating the way that you allow for power dynamics to play out in your life along those lines, it looks to me like you're releasing a lot along those lines, and you are becoming a little bit insistent upon that expansion, that broadening, that feeling very open and able to do what it is that you want, to believe what it is that you truly believe, to be much more authentic, to then become more curious about different ways of doing things because you've kind of gotten yourself out of a box, so to say. So that should be really lovely and excellent. You may have a travel experience also later in the month if you do, you know, make sure you're checking itineraries and stuff like this. But I will say it's likely to be a very profound experience if you are interacting with other cultures, if you are in university, if you're traveling, anything along these lines that, again, expands or broadens your horizons. It's likely that that's going to feel very profound late in the month here. This is also going to be our last eclipse along the Aries Libra axis that we're dealing with. And so it represents the kind of culmination or wrapping up of a lot of shifts around this area. So again, like I said, beliefs, interactions with people who are very different from you, what it is that you identify with, what it is that you feel aligned with, what it is that you feel is really authentic for you. So this is one of our last opportunities to utilize at least an eclipse along those lines. We will then be getting on the 30th of the month, so right at the end of the month, right after that eclipse, then Neptune moves into Aries, and that will be just straight up broadening those horizons a lot. It's going to have you really thinking just so big, like the sky is the limit, basically. And that's going to be really beautiful and wonderful. It's a nice place to have Neptune. It can be a little confusing about what it is that you believe, but it puts you on almost like a pilgrimage of self, a pilgrimage of what it is that you genuinely align with there. And then Saturn will also be moving into this area. So you'll have more opportunities. It's just that those to address this area of your life in the coming months here, but it's just that it's going to be a very different flavor. So that is something to keep in mind. And if you see, like I said, the power games, power dynamics, weird things coming up, dependencies within your relationships, or even the ways that you've been conditioned by your close relationships, really try your best to look at it as a really wonderful gift. It's just trying to say to you, hey, look at this. Is this working for you? Because if it's not, it's up to you to decide that that's not for you, and to make those internal changes along those lines, to decide for yourself that you refuse to believe in any sort of difficult or limited or scarcity mindsets and things like this. So another thing that I will say, I think I was actually going to say this when I first started, but I wound up forgetting because I didn't have it written here. If you can start to save money a little bit more than usual, especially starting around mid-month of this year, if you find that you have some opportunities along those lines, I would take them. And the reason I say this is we're setting up for more eclipses in the 2nd and 8th houses. That's where we're going to have them for the coming year and a half or so. And so there could be little hiccups, little reorientations and things like that. And hey, the better that you can set yourself up for that, the less stressful that might be later on. So having just an eclipse in Virgo and not yet an eclipse in Pisces during this season, that should set us up pretty well, or set you up, since you have up in your 8th house of a little bit more along the lines of financial complications or complexities or intricacies that you need to deal with. We're not getting one up here. So it doesn't look to me like that's a problem right now. You have this coming up in the sector of your income and your security and so forth. And so This is a little bit more of a straightforward area to deal with finances. And if you find that you have the resources to sock some of those away, I would just recommend that to set yourself up better for later. Since we have this interesting Virgo Aries eclipse set coming up. So, in summary, I think that's a lot of what I wanted to cover. Mars has been annoying in your 12th house for a little while. That can also have you feeling a little bit weird about subconscious conditioning and thoughts that are coming up. You could totally feel like recently you have felt like your thoughts are more negative or more restricted than usual. Like they're not as lighthearted as usual. It's not moving on yet, but it's now direct for sure, and it won't be coming back into this house. So we're just going to give this a little bit longer. This Mars is going to wind up moving on at the end of April. Try and hang in there, try and lighten up those thoughts as you're able. But just keep in mind that that's still there, but it is moving on eventually. So let's talk about the summary here real quick. Finances, values, personal growth, big time. The lunar eclipse in Virgo shaking up income and resources, releasing scarcity mindsets, I think is going to be really important without overspending necessarily or outdated financial habits. Saving is wonderful. Not to scare you about anything down the road, because it's not like there's, oh, you're going to need it or something. It's just best to set yourself up well. Time to reassess your relationship with money and abundance during this time. The solar eclipse in Aries, energizing your sector of adventure, expansion, inspiring you, this is important, to take risks, embrace new opportunities for growth, throwing off shackles. Pisces season is deepening your focus on intimacy, shared resources, transformation, dependencies, again, those power dynamics and things like that we have with others. Let go of fear and embrace vulnerability and trust that deeper connections are being forged around this period of time. So yeah, that I think for now is what I have for you, Leo Rising. I will be discussing more in the next video I'm releasing very shortly about Neptune in Aries in your 9th house here. So keep an eye open for that and we'll go more into that. But yeah, I hope it is a beautiful month for you, Leo. Okay, so for Virgo rising, we have a lunar eclipse in Virgo coming up. So this is going to be very personally significant for you and really all about releasing any self-limiting thoughts, any critiques of self that you may have fallen into, any sort of habits of just having almost too high of standards for yourself, where you can feel sometimes like that winds up boxing you in. With this lunar eclipse, this is all about releasing along those lines. Self-renewal, release, very, very powerful moment here. This is a total lunar eclipse. Also, if you are in the States or Canada or Mexico, which is likely because that's where most of us are from on this channel, but then this is also going to be total invisibility here. So the visibility of this eclipse is going to be total here, which is to say that for people in this area, this will be extra significant, and it's in your 1st house, extra significant. When we're talking about a lunar eclipse, we're talking about a full moon, which already in and of itself speaks to release. And the South Node as well speaks to release. So we have a doubling up on that message here. So I would definitely recommend thinking through any limiting beliefs or habits, ways of going about things, overly critical attitudes toward yourself that you might be aware of, and just kind of set intentions and prep yourself up for middle of the month. There's a really excellent opportunity to release along those lines. It's also going to probably bring it up pretty sharply. So if you want to take some time, especially say if you have Pisces or Virgo placements other than your rising sign, this could become a little bit emotional. So you might want to take the time to spend some time by yourself to work through this, because it's not the most lighthearted thing, but it's a wonderful, beautiful thing that is very powerful for you. So letting go of old versions of yourself, outdated expectations. That's probably a better way of saying high standards, you know. But yeah, anything that no longer aligns with who you feel like you truly are here. Now, we're also then getting a solar eclipse in your 8th house here of financial dependencies and interconnections with other people, vulnerability, intimacy, deep relationships, personal transformation, things along these lines. And so those are likely matters that will be brought to your attention to look at at the end of the month. And that's also then setting you up for, so for instance, you could wind up like signing a contract or deepening a relationship, something along these lines. You could even wind up rethinking questions around dependencies and power dynamics and things like this, and what's healthy, what's not, what feels right for you, and what doesn't. But that eclipse and these retrogrades from Mercury and Venus that we'll talk about in a second in this area are also setting you up for a very long-term transit of Neptune in Aries, which is going to be going on until 2039. And I'm going to go deeper into that in the next video coming up about what that's going to mean for you in your 8th house there. But suffice it to say that there's going to be a lot of potential idealism and opening up in this area. So if trust has been something that's been difficult for you, this Neptune in this area is going to be certainly calling that into question and guiding you toward the types of connections that you need in order to continue your own personal growth and evolution around questions of trust and intimacy and so forth. So that is likely to feel very significant and important. This could be for sure a pretty emotional month for you, without a doubt. A lunar eclipse in your 1st house, and then a solar eclipse in your 8th house. Plus then we have a pile up in Pisces, which is making everyone a little bit more emotional. So try and take care of yourself. If you're feeling a bit more like tears are closer to the surface than usual and things like this, you know, just go easy on yourself. You're not losing it, you know. That's just the energy that you're dealing with right now. So, and not necessarily sadness, more along the lines of a lot of feelings about things, especially about yourself and other people and how that plays out. So this solar eclipse in Aries, again, bringing up questions around shared resources and transformation, potentially even bringing up opportunities for financial or emotional breakthroughs, and also potentially opportunities for a greater understanding of your finances and your vulnerabilities and things like this. We should never underestimate how much just looking at something and understanding it from a slightly different perspective can help, so to say. All right, I lost my train of thought there. So again, Pisces season, highlighting your partnerships. This whole mess right here, not a bad mess, but a mess nonetheless, in your 7th house. This is also angular, so it's very significant. There's a lot going on here. There's going to be a lot to do with your partnerships and relationships coming up. And if you feel like that's been already a bit heavy, I think that's what you're rethinking here. Because what's interesting about these retrogrades that we're getting of Mercury and Venus coming back into Pisces here is that what they're addressing is something that since 2011 you've been dealing with Neptune, where Neptune has been causing you to be open to certain relationships for better and worse, a bit idealistic about other people, possibly even putting others on more of a pedestal than they necessarily should be. That would probably then be playing into the questions that are coming up with that lunar eclipse about how you look at yourself relative to others too. But Saturn also has been in this house co-present with Neptune, which is very complicated, since March of 2023. And this can require a lot of effort and a lot of work. So if you feel like relationships have been, especially with this being the end of this Neptune in Pisces thing, it's taught you what you needed to know. It's presented to you all sorts of different detours and side quests and things like this when it comes to other people. It's done all that stuff. It can feel with these outer planets like they start to wear out their welcome, like the story gets a little bit old. So that'll be moving on finally. Saturn will be moving on also this year. We will get little retrogrades, but then they'll move on permanently by February of next year. So this is just coming through this area to really look at, okay, what were the lessons? If relationships have gotten complicated and they've become less fun, are there some that have maybe, in terms of people in your life, maybe have outworn their welcome a bit? I wouldn't totally recommend cutting people out right now. And the reason that I say that is that the next day after this Virgo eclipse, the ruler of this eclipse, which is Mercury, because Mercury rules Virgo, the very next day on the 15th, that Mercury is going retrograde. So I feel for a lot of people, and you would definitely be one of the cases where this would probably come through. There could be a sense in the beginning of the month and leading up to the middle of like really wanting to not deal with someone anymore. And then right on the heels of making a decision like that, starting to rethink it. So I wouldn't necessarily be cutting people out willy-nilly, but if you're able to call some of your energy back in and then also take a little bit less seriously in terms of heaviness, your relationships in this time, I think that that'll be pretty solid. Saturn makes things just way too serious, so Mercury and Venus, of course, we're going to be having the standard Mercury retrograde complications, miscommunications, technology issues, misunderstandings for sure for you, because this is going to be in your 8th and 7th houses. I would try not to hurt other people's feelings, but do express your boundaries not as sharply as you might feel, but as clearly as you possibly can. Because there is a risk here of like stepping on toes and things like that. And if that's something you want to avoid, it's not sharpness you're looking for, it's clarity. With Venus going retrograde, then we do reevaluate things a lot. And reevaluation is just such a perfect word for Venus retrograde. I almost want to write that down immediately because I haven't noticed that before. But reevaluation, it's what are you doing? You're valuing something up. You're trying to figure out, okay, what is the value here and what isn't? What's working? What's not? And that's really what Venus brings up for us again. This whole area of your chart, the 8th and the 7th, big time relationship questions. So it's bringing those from a deeper place in your relationships a little bit more to the surface in a retrograde fashion where you're reevaluating and you're rethinking these things. And it's bringing that to be actually dealt with. Things you've probably been feeling but haven't been saying, to say them and to address these things so that once Neptune and then Saturn wind up moving into this 8th house of yours, that's at least a little bit more clear, because that will complicate things. I'll be addressing that a little bit more later on. But yeah, so solar eclipse in Aries, activating your sector of shared resources, vulnerabilities, power dynamics and relationships, interconnections, intertwining with other people, and transformation. Opportunities for, I think we already went through that, Pisces season, your partnerships. Yeah. Focus on building relationships that are rooted in mutual respect and support. And I think that's going to be just the best way to go about this for you. And one of the best ways to do that, this is completely cliched, but for a good reason, is through clear communication and making your expectations with people very clear and requesting pretty straightforwardly and expecting answers around what other people's expectations are as well. You know, that is for sure something that you should feel pretty entitled to within a relationship. So yeah, that I think pretty much is what I have for you, Virgo Rising, for March of 2025. Thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Libra Rising, what do we have here? We have a lunar eclipse taking place in your 12th house here. We're going to have a solar eclipse in your 7th house. We have Venus and Mercury going retrograde in your 7th house and running back into your 6th. We have a pileup in your 6th house that we are dealing with, and that is going to be a lot of the most significant stuff. So what does this all mean? So let's talk about this lunar eclipse first. This is going to be taking place on the 14th of March, and it's going to be a total eclipse. It will be directly over all of North America. So if you are on this continent, then this is going to have a total effect on you personally. And this is in the area of your subconscious and your beliefs. This is the area that is a bit beyond the veil. It's where you function on instinct. It's this kind of liminal space between spirit and physical, mundane life, you personally. So there's likely to be a lot along those lines coming up. You will for sure want to be listening to those instincts and your intuition around this time. You may want to take even some time to yourself in that mid-month period to allow for this eclipse to really settle in for you and make sure that you're not really overlooking it, because it's a nice one, but it is bringing up questions around your personal conditioning and patterns that you've picked up on throughout your life that they might be a bit limiting. This could be a subconscious tendency to be too critical of yourself. That's something that as a Libra rising, you naturally have in your 12th house. And so that will be coming up around this time, but it's all about release with a full moon. So with a lunar eclipse, and then also on the south node side. So you are being asked to let go of some of those patterns and so forth, for the sake of better health. And what we have a lot going on along the lines of your 6th house, 12th house axis, and that's beyond physical health. That is spiritual, mental, emotional health for you as well. So I would set some intentions to really think that through around the middle of the month there. So yeah, also on your inner world, you could feel that is enriched also by this lunar eclipse. I would fully expect that your imagination is really heightened. This will also then be kind of playing into the fact that you have Pluto has moved recently, like last November, and for a long time. That's going to be in your 5th house. That's pretty interesting and neat, but it's going to be also then deepening your imagination. So this could also be triggering that up as well as something that you're developing. So the lunar eclipse, yes, illuminating your subconscious, urging you to release hidden fears, especially as well, old wounds, patterns that no longer serve you. A deep healing and introspection is going to be really wonderful mid-month. Now, the solar eclipse that's happening in Aries, that's going to be a little bit more of an extroverted thing for you. It's speaking directly to your relationships with others. And so you could wind up, certainly with a solar eclipse in your 7th house, meeting someone significant that's new. That's often one of the ways that it plays out. You could be deepening a relationship There can also be, if a relationship is really not great for you, that can bring things up to a head for you to possibly step away from some people as well. I will caution, though, that it looks to me in the middle of the month like there's going to be a lot of people who want to take a step away from others, who might do so in less of a flexible way than they will have wished that they had in hindsight. And the reason for that is that the day after this full moon in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury, the day after that, on March 15th, Mercury, it goes retrograde. So it looks to me like there's going to be a lot of people doing that. And so I would caution a bit against that, since your seventh house is definitely coming up as activated for sure this month. So yeah, energizing partnerships, bringing fresh energy to your closest relationships. And yeah, even just like sorting things out, like a great conversation that makes expectations clear with someone who's important to you. And now these two, Mercury and Venus, they're both going retrograde weirdly enough, they're going retrograde right around the same degree that we will later then have that solar eclipse. So there's something weirdly important about this like 10-degree area of Aries. So these two will go retrograde. And what we have with these is the standard Mercury retrograde annoyances. It's angular for you, and which is to say it's in your seventh house. This is a very important house in your chart. But again, also dealing with other people. So the standard stuff of miscommunications, misunderstandings are likely to be coming up for you in relationships around that time. So that's another reason why I would caution around being a little bit too sharp and short with people around that time. This can, of course, also then just bring up miscellaneous technology and communications issues as well. With Venus retrograde, this is a big reevaluation when Venus goes retrograde. It asks you, how are your relationships doing? What is it that you value? Do you enjoy things anymore? Questions around that when it comes to different things. So these are both asking questions of, again, specifically your relationships with other people, especially close relationships. So rethinking those, reevaluating them, reconsidering how they are working or how they're developing, and trying to direct that a little bit more consciously and with more intention. So not being on autopilot in your relationships, but really looking at them in an honest way and considering them. Now, these two are going to be going back into your sixth house. And when we have retrogrades that hop houses like this, it for sure can tie the themes of these together. Now, when we're looking at the sixth house, which you also are having just a lot going on in this area, because Pisces is so overemphasized around this period of time. This is the area of tasks, work, your routines, your errands. This can also be where skills and things along those lines, training and questions of your own personal health as well. That's where that comes through. So there's a relationship between these two things, your partners and then the work, the effort that you put in, as well as health. So this can be a matter of you feeling like you've been putting a ton of work and effort into your relationships, and you might feel like you're not seeing that reciprocated. And you may feel like that's then having an impact on your like personal energy levels. How many spoons are left for you to be doing you things with, so to say. So that might be a topic of discussion that winds up coming up. If you are not feeling that way, this could be someone else feeling that way and bringing that to you to consider. If there are big talks with partners coming up, I expect for them to feel like you're really wading through some stuff. The sixth house, again, it feels like effort. It feels like work. It's highly productive, but it is a little bit dry. So I could see for sure that a little thing where you think, okay, we're just going to clear up some expectations here. It'll be like a 10-minute conversation, could wind up turning into a week of things being a little weird and having to have conversation after conversation to clear things up. So if that happens, you're not going crazy. Your partner isn't necessarily going crazy. It's just the energy that you're dealing with. And the cool thing about a retrograde, even though it's pretty annoying, is that what it does is these planets, they've moved through the sixth house of yours, they've gone into the seventh, they've turned back. They've looked at all of this from a different perspective now. And then having gathered all that information and the extra, then they get to turn back around and go through this area again, having actually internalized a lot of really helpful information about this area of your life. And so this could also be speaking to your working relationships, like if you are close with coworkers or employees or whatnot. Those could also be coming up as well with this big retrograde. But yeah, working on your health, if that's something you have been procrastinating about, I would try your best not to. One thing that Saturn does is if we procrastinate, it can cause complications. And so I would just really try to follow through on any sort of health goals that you have with the retrogrades and the overemphasis on this area of your life as well. You're probably going to want to like rearrange and organize things better so that your day-to-day life feels more straightforward than it has been for a long time, because with Neptune and Saturn here, this has been a bit muddied up, a bit complicated for quite a while here. So yeah, we have new beginnings are possible, be open to change and growth for sure, with an angular solar eclipse, without a doubt. Pisces season, highlighting your health and daily routines, encouraging prioritization of self-care, and creating a balanced and nurturing lifestyle. Also, balanced and nurturing relationships, making sure that neither of you feel like your efforts are not being reciprocated. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have for you, Libra Rising, though. I will be talking in the next video that I'm going to release pretty shortly here about how Neptune in Aries is likely to be playing out for you in your seventh house from this year until about 2039. So do stay tuned for that. But other than that, I hope you have a great month. And thank you so much for being here. All right, so for Scorpio rising, we have a lunar eclipse in your 11th house here, and we will be having a big old pile up in your 5th house, which is actually, that's pretty nice there. We also then have a solar eclipse in your 6th house, and so what does this all mean? Let's start with the lunar eclipse here. So with a full moon, which is when it turns into an eclipse, that would be a lunar eclipse, and also with the south node. That's what makes a full moon into an eclipse, is when it's close to this point. So these are both about releasing, and this is bringing to the forefront for you to look at and consider your friendships and your hopes and dreams, allies, groups that you're involved with, your even like your beliefs about society and things like this. It is bringing those up for you to release something along those lines. I do need to caution right off the bat, because this is happening in your 11th house. Try your best mid-month to not willy-nilly, in a way that in any conceivable way you might regret, cut off a relationship. The reason for that is that right after this lunar eclipse, which could really encourage you to cut off a relationship and make you feel like, yeah, I've decided. The ruler of this eclipse in Virgo is Mercury. The day after the eclipse, Mercury turns retrograde. So that's been screaming to me for a bit that there's going to be a lot of decisions that people make in the mid-month that they almost immediately regret. So try not to have regrets in terms of friendships or the groups that you're involved with, colleagues, and things like this during this month. That's one thing I definitely need to throw out a bit of a warning about, since this is taking place in your 11th house. So your social life is likely to be very highlighted. But again, like I said, it's about releasing something here. And so there could be a degree to which you feel like you have gotten yourself in such a way, or have found yourself in such a way is a better way to put that probably, where you're less authentic than maybe you feel like you could or should be in relationships. So you're being encouraged with this to certainly release things like that. Now, if it's specific relationships where you feel like you're going to be judged if you are yourself, it's probably a big question here that you're being called to ask of yourself, how much do I really want this person in my life? And are there any ways that I can protect myself a little bit along those lines? The reason I say that is, like, we can then carry that expectation of criticism from a person that we know is a little bit nasty along those lines. And we can then import that into other relationships and then give that a little while by doing that. And what you're doing is conditioning yourself to edit yourself, to censor yourself, and to not be yourself because of a fear that came up with a person, however long ago, that was very judgmental of you, So I would wager most that that's something that's coming up for you with this lunar eclipse here. Now, there could, though, also be, because the 11th house also has to do with hopes and dreams and things like this, aspirations. Also, people who support your career and their input on you, society, things like this. So there may be a hope or a dream or something that you used to have that you don't feel like fits anymore, that you don't really feel like you want to continue to push for around this time. And that can be a little bit bittersweet when you realize that, because usually these are things in which we have invested some emotional energy, possibly some physical energy, possibly some money, things like that. And so I would be gentle with yourself about that. It's a lunar eclipse. It's going to be visible over North America. So if you're in North America, the emotions will be heightened during this time, especially because we've got a ton of Pisces stuff going on. Everyone's a little bit more emotional. So try not to be hard on yourself, and try to keep in mind that often we are presented with hopes, dreams, goals, visions, that it's not ultimately that this was presented to us and that this is something that we grabbed onto in order to do that, but rather to learn something through the process of pushing for that. So it's not like you are scrapping something completely. You get to keep all of the experiences with you and then apply all of that to future goals, future visions, and things like that. On the other hand, also, this doesn't necessarily have to be that you're letting go of a goal or something, but that you feel it coming up as a pressure, as something that you almost feel like it's now or never. Like, I need to go after this. This is something that I need to actually finally just do. I need to stop boxing myself in, and I need to do this. And so if that is the case, I would certainly recommend to do that. I will, though, because I'm mentioning that to you, I I would caution in the second half of the month, and I'm doing this for everyone because there's one thing this month that I'm seeing that I don't love, which is there's this minor grand trine that's forming between Saturn in Pisces, Uranus in Taurus, and Mars in Cancer here. Mars has just gone through a very important retrograde. It only goes retrograde every once in a while, so it is very, very significant. And the thing with Mars and Saturn is that they're not just terrible, useless planets. They are effective, but they tend to complicate things. And when they're in agreement, that's something I would side-eye quite a bit. Now, also, I like Uranus. It is in an area that's a bit complicated for it, being in Taurus. It's not the most natural place for it to be in. And that, which is sometimes very disruptive and weird and can throw things sideways in very unexpected ways. If Uranus is in agreement with both Mars and Saturn, and Mars has just gone through a big retrograde in a sign that it also doesn't like to be in, I think there's something really big that we're needing to adjust to, that we're needing to adjust around in this month, for one thing. But this aspect pattern that's going to hold for the whole pretty much second half of the month, and really almost entirely throughout the month, if you initiate something when we have an aspect pattern like that, it's not likely to go the way that you're expecting. So the intention then is almost irrelevant. And that's not ever something that you want when you're initiating something. You want to set your intention, you want to initiate it, and you want it to go forward pretty straightforwardly. So if there's something that is really important to you that you're like, I'm fed up with not doing this, I really just need to do it. I hate to say it, I'm sure this is annoying, but if it's something that you haven't already started on, I wouldn't necessarily recommend now to do that in. I would wait until we're a bit more into the spring in order to get some of the energies a bit better and more straightforward. Otherwise, it's just likely to complicate the whole thing. Now, we're also then going to be getting, like I said, this Mercury is going to go retrograde. Venus is retrograde. They're going from about this point of 9-10 degrees where we're going to have this solar eclipse, which is just a trip. That these two are halting on this point, and then we have the sun and the moon having an eclipse at that point. Very weird. But these two are going retrograde from your 6th house into your 5th. And the thing with retrograde planets that hop into a different house is it does tend to tie these houses' themes together here. So straightforwardly, if you have kids, there's likely to be a little bit extra effort and work that you need to put into that. They may even do a bit of an about face on something that causes you then to have to somehow put more energy into what it is that they're doing in a way that might be a little bit annoying. And it might stretch your routine a bit. But this can also be big questions around, again, your daily routine, the tasks you do, the work you do, coworkers, employees, basically your day-to-day working life and how that's organized. Probably you're finding that there's something about that might not be as enjoyable as it could be. And so because of the fact that these are going retrograde from the 6th into the 5th, the 5th is a place of things that we enjoy. It's a really wonderful house. That's why I'm saying this is actually pretty cool that you're getting a bit of a pile up here, because you are really asking yourself those questions of what is it that I love? What is it that makes me feel more self-actualized when I engage in it in terms of activities, in terms of intentions, in terms of hobbies, and so on. In terms of relationships even. How is it that I can create a life that I truly feel is my own and incorporate that, therefore, that kind of an energy into as many different aspects of your life, which is to say, your routine, as possible. So this retrograde for you is actually pretty nice. And even though it might feel like a weird amount of effort is required of you this month. What I ultimately think that all of this is bringing up is making your life more fun and making it more to your liking. So that looks actually pretty decent and nice. Then, of course, like I said, we have that solar eclipse in this house of your sixth house. And so that would also indicate a major change in your routine and your daily tasks and working life. There could be something surprising or weird that winds up arising in that area of just day-to-day regular stuff going on. And then, oh, there's this weird big surprise that seems to at least gently reorient the trajectory of your life. So that is something that I would expect and watch out for, but it can also just really indicate that the changes you're making to your daily routine in order to make it more enjoyable are having a really wonderful and profound effect as well. And that is definitely something that I would expect there. Also, if you have been wanting to create like a health routine that doesn't feel like work, I would highly recommend trying to sort that out around this time, because you've got a lot of energy here that would help along those lines. I'll give you a bit of a thing that I do. Recently, I just got off my back about, quote, doing exercise correctly. It just kind of dawned on me that a lot of the information that we have been conditioned to understand about exercise is insanely regimented. It's ridiculously regimented. It doesn't need to be that way, you know? And so I have basically started to incorporate into my life doing different things that constitute exercise that aren't quote unquote exercise, that are just moving differently in my day-to-day life in ways that feel like they are loosening up muscles and strengthening up muscles and moving around the bones and the cartilage and so on and so forth. And so that might be something that is also nice for you to think about, because it did seem like a pretty big breakthrough to me, just because I've always thought about it as like, okay, you've got to do a set of a specific exercise and it gets boring, you know? So yeah, that would be a way that I could definitely also see this playing out. So yeah, then also, like I said, we have a big pile up in your house of self-expression, authenticity, joy, hobbies, interests, also dating. So that if you are dating, that is likely to be taking up a lot of your focus. This is also the house of children, and so they could be taking up a lot of focus as well. But this is also an area of your imagination and things along those lines. So for one thing, it's a really wonderful house. It's considered the joy of Venus. Venus really likes to be in that house, and it will be. And when it is, Venus in Pisces is exalted. So Venus is going to be thrilled for you as a transit, which is always the way that you want it to be. Now, it could go a little bit overboard pie in the sky. If you are dating, I would take your time for sure, because this could have you just like really quickly head over heels for something that might not be the wisest, considering we also have Neptune here. But if you are a creative or an imaginative type, this is really excellent to have this kind of stuff going on in your fifth house in Pisces here, because you have the structure to be able to make things happen. Also, the fact that those retrogrades are coming from the sixth into the fifth also indicates that you can regiment to an extent. I know I just said don't regiment too much, but you can create a bit of a routine around those creative hobbies of yours that works for you and that is actually fun in this period of time as well. And then, yeah, Neptune making this all a lot bigger and dreamier and more idealistic and optimistic. The sun lighting this up, the North Node being here. if you're a creative type, this is just a really excellent pile up to be having as well. But let's see here. So to sum this up, yeah, shaking up social life and creative energy, the lunar eclipse in Virgo, lighting up the sector of friendships and community, urging you to release draining or outdated connections. Quick reminder, try not to do that in a way that you can't reverse, especially mid-month, just for now, just because it's so strongly indicated in that Mercury going retrograde the very next day after that eclipse. But yeah, making space for relationships that truly uplift and inspire you. That's what the name of the game is this month. What's uplifting, what's inspiring? You're going to want that in your relationships, your hopes and dreams for yourself, and your routine. And this is really all about infusing that throughout your life. The solar eclipse in Aries energizes health and daily routine, bringing opportunities to reset your habits and prioritize well-being. Also prioritizing joy. What do you enjoy? How can you bring that more into your daily life? Pisces season sparks joy and creativity. Embrace playfulness and self-expression and the things that light you up, and let your inner child come out to play. So yeah, that's a lot of pretty much what you're going to be dealing with in this month. Actually quite lovely. I like it a lot. And I will also in a couple of days here be talking about what Neptune in Aries, which is occurring at the very end of the month. This is going to be moving into your 6th house and also then infusing more of that dreamy, optimistic, go with the flow. Let's loosen up the regimentation of the routine a bit, but still hopefully keep it functional as a routine. I'll be going into that even more in that next video. So yeah, if you're curious about that, do stay tuned. But I do hope that you have a very wonderful month, and I will talk to you later, Scorpio Rising. So for Sagittarius Rising, we have the lunar eclipse in Virgo is taking place in your 10th house of career, reputation, legacy, your life out in the public sphere. We also have a big pile up in your 4th house of home and family and roots and so forth. Then we have Mercury and Venus going retrograde in your 5th house of creativity, self-expression, hobbies, interests, children, lighthearted romantic relationships, and things like this, your imagination. These two will be going retrograde in this house, and they're going to be bringing some of that into your 4th, where we're going to have an overlap of indications along these lines of Pisces and Aries in your chart here. We'll also then have a solar return in this 5th house as well that will be pretty significant. So what does this all mean? Let's start with this lunar eclipse. This is going to take place on March 14th. And this is, like I said, impacting questions around your life direction, your life path, your career, your reputation, things like this. So a lunar eclipse is a pretty strong indication of releasing and letting go of things. So is the south node. So we have a lunar eclipse on the south node this time, which makes the indications of what it is that the eclipse is doing a lot more clear. It's all about release and letting go, and something culminating where you're then able to no longer deal with an aspect of it. So that happening in your 10th house of career, this could for sure be like a promotion where you are then releasing the previous title, status, tasks, things like this, and stepping up into something else. This could have you leaving a position. For instance, if you are retiring, or if you're deciding that you're not super happy with a situation that you're in, you could be finding something else, or deciding, I have enough savings, I'm just going to take a bit of time out of the market and just chill and focus a little bit less on that area of your life, something along those lines. What this indicates, though, is a big shift and a change of a type that is releasing. So it's not that you necessarily will like lose a job. That's not outside of the realm of possibility. But if you do, I have to say, for Sagittarius rising, if you do wind up losing a job around this period of time, it's called for that you would. So you're being intentionally reoriented. And I find that can be a little bit heartening to know, and weird little things like that wind up arising. You're being told basically by that situation that there was something about it that wasn't working for you and that was no longer leading you in the direction that you should be going. So, yeah, shifts in your career and personal growth for sure. Lunar eclipse is illuminating that sector of public image, long-term goals, urging you to release outdated ambitions or expectations as well. So if there's something that you wanted in your career or public standing of any sort, some people, that's not a working life, that's maybe some sort of reputation or something. If there have been ambitions that were really important to you and you feel as though they are falling away, I would also go with that. That's also called for. So paying attention to what's going on in that area, it's being indicated to you right now a different direction that you should be probably considering expanding into a new direction than just the one that you're on. And that can come up then in subsequent eclipse seasons to actually deal with. It's rarely the case that we get a final kind of resolution in the first eclipse that we're getting. This is the first Virgo eclipse in this whole series that we've had in years. And we're going to be having Virgo and Pisces eclipses for the coming year and a half. So what this says to me is, like I said, it's not at all necessary that you like lose a job in this period of time. There could be ideas coming up for you around, I'm not sure that I love this anymore. And so maybe how can I reorient myself so that I can make a change later on? And probably those changes would be made during Virgo or Pisces season of the upcoming year and a half. So reassessing what success truly means to you is absolutely huge around this time. What is it you're really wanting? That's often what eclipses are asking of us, is those bigger questions around these different areas of our life. So we'll also then have at the end of the month a solar return or solar eclipse. It must be because I'm coming up on my solar return. I keep saying that. So we have a solar eclipse in your 5th house, which is pretty lovely. And we also then have Mercury and Venus here turning retrograde. So this is going to be impacting, like I said, your creativity and the things that you enjoy, your interests, what activities you'd like to do, your imagination, authenticity, even inner child, things along those lines. And so that is getting really energized. You could have opportunities like creative opportunities that wind up introducing themselves somehow into your life. Like, for instance, if you run across a YouTube video about some specific creative medium that maybe you weren't aware that you would have such an interest in, that's something that a solar eclipse tends to do, is that it will just show us something that maybe we haven't considered before. Now, this is also an area of dating and things like this. So certainly that could indicate a new romantic interest arising. This can also, though we're dealing with 5th house, 4th house overlap here, this could also be the birth of a child into your family, whether that be directly indicating you as a parent or as a different kind of family member to that baby. There could be a baby. So that is also something to keep in mind. This can have, if you have children already, this can have them taking an interesting turn too, where they are reaching a new stage or a new phase in their life, where they're coming a little bit more into their own, and they're maybe even becoming a little bit more independent. And so your relationship is going through some interesting shifts. So I would go with that to the extent that you feel that you can as well. So the solar eclipse in Aries energizing the sector of creativity and passion, igniting new inspiration and opportunities for self-expression. Really beautiful stuff there. And that is also then infusing itself into this jumble of planets that we have during Pisces season, where we have Saturn, the Sun, North Node, and Neptune here. The Sun will move on, but Venus and Mercury will come back into this area and be with the rest of these. And so there's just a whole ton going on in this area. And that speaks to your home and your family, your sense of comfort and security there that you create for yourself and that you create with your family, as well as roots and, questions around your narrative around where you come from and so forth. So this could be that you are spending a lot more time doing these creative things. This could have you redecorating for sure and like infusing more creativity into your home itself. This could have you questioning whether you want to maybe move or buy a new home. That, I have to say, Sagittarius Rising is something that's going to be coming up as a big question for you in the coming years. You might not actually move, but you'll probably think about it because you're going to be getting eclipses also in this house once that North Node no longer is on the edge and actually causing Aries eclipses there. So you're going to be getting big questions around career and home life in general in the coming year and a half. So something to keep in mind there. But yeah, this could also just have you bringing into your home things that you enjoy as well. I also, I wouldn't even be surprised if you were to like get a pet or something like that, to find or meet a pet. And let's see. Yeah, Pisces season, focusing on your home and family life, create a nurturing, peaceful environment and reconnect with your roots. Trust that you're building a solid foundation for the future. Now, you could also have, so yeah, that looks like a lot of what you are dealing with this month, Sagittarius Rising. Right at the end of the month, this Neptune is going to be moving into Aries, and that's going to be pretty significant. It'll be there pretty much until 2039. And the next video that I put out in a couple days is going to be all about what Neptune in Aries throughout the houses is going to mean. So I'll go into that more in depth in that video, but suffice it to say that your imagination and your creativity is going to be really lit up in the coming many years. This is a pretty wonderful place to have Neptune moving through. It can cause a little bit of confusion. It can cause some detours and picking up hobbies that maybe you don't completely stick with, but somehow they inform other interests that you wind up running into, things like that. So I'll go more deeply into that in the coming video, but that is also something that'll be happening right at the end of the month here. So yeah, that is what I have for you, Sagittarius Rising. I hope you have a wonderful month, and I will talk to you later. All right, so for Capricorn Rising, we have a lunar eclipse taking place in your ninth house of broadened horizons of your philosophy, your worldview, higher education, travel, foreign places, things along these lines, spirituality. We will also then have a solar eclipse in your fourth house of home and family, your roots. We'll also have Mercury and Venus going retrograde here and coming back into this big jumble of planets that we have in Pisces, which is in your third house of learning and communication, exchange, your community, your neighborhood, siblings, peers, the people and places and things that you deal with around you on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot going on in this area. I see you probably pretty busy around this period of time. So let's dive into it. So you have a lunar eclipse taking place in your ninth house. Now, this is about releasing some belief that you have, ultimately. That's what this is going to wind up boiling down to. When we have a lunar eclipse, it's about releasing. When we're talking about the south node, it's about releasing. So fortunately, this eclipse is pretty straightforward in that we've got a lunar on the south node. It's all about releasing. So there's something coming up around this area, around your beliefs, possibly around your opinions of things, your worldview, your spirituality, that feels a bit outdated. And there may even be a bit of a feeling boxed in or critiqued or even self-critique along these lines that you'll be releasing around this time. So that's going to be pretty important. If you are traveling around this time, it's likely to feel a lot more profound in terms of its impact on you. That could even be a trigger for releasing a conception that you have, maybe about a specific place or even about the place that you're from. You know, I find that travel can definitely do that in a really wonderful way. And even like reading, diving into study, things along those lines are likely to be introducing something to you that kind of shakes away from you something that you're outgrowing then. So that's really beautiful and nice. So yeah, expansion and transformation going on, especially in the mind. The lunar eclipse in Virgo lights up the sector of travel, learning, personal growth, urging you to release limiting beliefs or fears about stepping out of your comfort zone here. That's going to be really big. So embrace new perspectives and opportunities for growth. Now, also then we have this Pisces stuff that's going on in your third house. And what's interesting is the third house being community, being what you're dealing with on a daily basis, it is that comfort zone. It's what you're used to. It's what you deal with all the time. And so there's a lot of focus on that as well. And there's a bit of a reevaluation about where you come from and what you believe about that, what you believe about those around you versus those far away. So there could even be some interesting conceptions that you didn't realize were going on subconsciously, assumptions that you have about where you live or where you were brought up versus the lives of other people and how they play out and how they live. And you may be finding that you actually align much more with the way that people who you feel like aren't like you in some way, that their way of doing something actually makes more sense to you than the way that you were brought up to do it. Because what we have here is Venus and Mercury are both going retrograde in the fourth house of your family, what you came into this world from, your roots, and the way that plays out, the impact of your family on you and on your patterns and your conditioning and so forth. And then the arena in which that typically plays out, which is that direct world around you. And that can really then reinforce some like cultural conceptions and things like that. So that's getting challenged in a very nice way and in a way that is fostering a lot of growth for you. This can be an area that we're going to be dealing with heightened emotion as well. So there could be a major emotional dimension to this too. So if you find that you're learning something that you feel like you wish that you had learned earlier so that you would have maybe adopted a different way of doing things sooner, or known that, wait, it's just the people who are around me who don't like this thing about me that I feel is really authentic. And I can see that because this is actually really normal in some other culture or something along those lines. It can be a little frustrating of like, oh man, I wish that I had known this earlier. And that can be a bit emotional too, but just try and go gentle with yourself in this period of major personal growth that you're going through around this time. So, yeah, the solar eclipse in Aries brings shifts to your home and family life. This could even see you moving, or you might, for instance, if you're traveling and finding that you really like a different culture, you could have some thoughts coming up about, is it possible for me to move here or to come here more often? Because you may feel like it feels like home there in some way. You could also have some interesting interruptions or development shifts within your family with family members where you're needing to redefine expectations and efforts and so forth, and make that more clear and communicate about that a lot as well. There could be even issues between siblings and parents that wind up taking up a lot of your attention around this time as well. But yeah, ultimately, be open to change and create a space that reflects your evolving needs. Yeah, there's something about the way that things have been done that is being released here, and you're growing into something then much broader, more all-encompassing of yourself, more comfortable for yourself. Pisces season highlighting communication and self-expression. Speak your truth with compassion and clarity, and your words have major power this month. Now, finally, also, we have, in addition to Venus and Mercury going retrograde from Aries back into Pisces, we will also, at the very end of the month, have Neptune stepping for the first time into Aries for the first time since the 19th century. So the first time we've all experienced it. And it's going to be here pretty much until 2039. Now, I'm going to do a whole video about this next in a few days and go into what Neptune and Aries in your fourth house is going to mean for you. But suffice it to say that it is bringing more of an imagination, more idealism, more expansiveness, and a bit of a dreaminess to your fourth house. So you may be reconceiving of what home and family is to you in order to make it more comfortable for you going forward, to make it feel a little bit more aligned. But you're going to be discovering just a huge, huge, huge amount about yourself and where you come from, your home and your family and all of that in the coming years. So this big retrograde from the fourth into the third is setting you up for that in a really wonderful way. So I would try not to sleep on it. The developments this month are going to be really important to inform us as we go forward about some of the changes we're going to be experiencing. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn Rising. I hope you have a really beautiful month, and I will talk to you again soon. So for Aquarius Rising, we have a lunar eclipse taking place in your 8th house of shared resources, intimacy, personal transformation, power dynamics and relationships, dependencies, things along these lines. And we also have a solar eclipse taking place in your 3rd house of communications, localities, peers, basically the places, things, and people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis and how you do that. And then we also have a very significant jumble of planets in Pisces during this Pisces season, because we have these extra placements of Saturn, the North Node, and Neptune here, that during this Pisces season, which we're also getting a retrograde back into Pisces by both Venus and Mercury, which is just so ridiculously huge. There's just a ridiculous ton that is going on in this area. That's all taking place in your 2nd house of finances, income, security, your values, and things like this. So let us dive into what all of this means. So let's start with that lunar eclipse in Virgo that's going to be taking place on March 14th this year. So this is bringing up questions around trust and dependency, and you're being asked to release or let go of something along those lines. Now, that could be speaking very literally and directly to a relationship in which you feel that there is an inbuilt sense of dependency that might feel not so great. So you being dependent on someone or vice versa could be something that is arising as an issue to be looked at and dealt with. Now, I wouldn't say that, oh, you need to do this quickly right now in terms of taking action around it. This is the first of a few Virgo eclipses of all different sorts that we're going to be experiencing in the coming year and a half. Also, in September, not only are you getting a new moon eclipse in that 8th house of yours, right before it, you're actually getting a new moon, just a straight up new moon there. So we're getting 2 new moons in a row in Virgo this September, and that's going to be further highlighting that 8th house. So on the one hand, if you want to try and sweep something under the rug in this area, it's not going to work long term. So maybe something to keep in mind, that this will need to be dealt with sooner than later, but I wouldn't stress too much about it. Also, when it comes to other people's evaluations of you or whatnot, the extent to which you feel that people have some kind of even intangible impact or power over you, possibly through no fault of their own, but through just your own conditioning around possibly even people pleasing, releasing along those lines as well. And any sort of fear of vulnerability or trust issues, you're being asked to work through those, and that's coming up to be dealt with as well. So there's a focus on resources and deep transformation this month, that lunar eclipse in Virgo illuminating your sector of intimacy and shared finances, urging you to release control or fear around vulnerability. Trusting the process of release and renewal is going to be really important for you around this time as you're sorting through some of that stuff. Now, then we have a solar eclipse at the end of the month right here in Aries, and that's going to bring in interesting opportunities to connect with that which is generally around you, to connect in more with your community. There's likely to be a lot of communication that is pretty much demanded of you around this period of time, because of the fact that you have these 2 retrogrades, including a Mercury retrograde in your 3rd house of communication. I would be so careful around miscommunications, around emails you thought you sent that you didn't, around emails that went to spam, around forgetting to check your mail and there being something time sensitive. Any sort of misunderstandings around pricing, I would definitely look at the fine print, because also when we get retrograde planets that hop into a different house, which these 2 are going to go back into Pisces, into your 2nd house of finances, I would pay very close attention, because you could wind up misvaluing something where you think that it has a higher value than it does and you're overpaying for it, or that you think that you'll be able to get more money for something than you actually do. It could go in the other way as well, where you might be thinking that something is out of reach. And so, oh, why should I even really do the research on buying this thing, because it's going to be too much. There might be a different way of going about it, like, marketplace or whatever, where you can find something at a better price. But I would be so very, very super careful about any big purchases around this time, because I can almost guarantee you that there's something that you're missing, that you're not understanding about that purchase. So I'd be very careful about that. I would wait until we get more into the spring before doing something like that. But yeah, generally speaking, there's likely to be a lot of communication with others also around finances, since we're dealing with the 8th house of resources that involve others. And then we're also talking about communication and your finances. That's really being emphasized quite a bit here. So yeah, the solar eclipse in Aries energizing your communication sector, bringing fresh energy with how you express yourself and connect with others. Speak your mind boldly and authentically. And there's something about your own value of your communication, like what you think that you bring to the table with your words, that I also feel like you're going to be reconsidering, and probably in such a way where you recognize that you have more of an impact than you might think that you do. And that'll set you up very nicely for when Neptune winds up at the very end of the month moving into Aries. You're then going to be having Neptune in your third house pretty much until 2039. And I'm about to do a video about that. That'll be up in a few days, talking about what you can expect from those years of Neptune and Aries in your third house. So do stick around by subscribing if you are curious about that. But in a nutshell, that is going to be having your voice be a lot more influential in subtle ways that you probably will not be super aware of. Also, it will introduce a little bit of confusion, but also idealism and optimism to those around you and that which you are engaging in on a day-to-day basis. You may even find that you are tapping into like a spiritual community, or you're just making your day-to-day life more spiritually inclined or more philosophically inclined, or even introducing like art and things like that, more music to your daily life. But yeah, this retrograde is basically setting you up very well for having Neptune then move into that third house. Now, also, then we have that pile up in your second house. So Pisces season highlighting your finances and self-worth. Trust your value and take steps to align your resources with your true priorities. Let's just talk about this straightforwardly in terms of what does it mean when you've got a heck ton of stuff going on in your second house. This can definitely introduce additional streams of income. There might be money that does come in a different way than you're used to. The retrogrades do add a peculiar kind of energy to the house. So yeah, some things could be coming in a way that you're not expecting, and it could be quite lovely. Saturn has probably had you pretty serious about this area of your life since like March of 2023. So you've probably been pretty focused on setting yourself up well financially. If it were not there, I would say, yeah, you're probably getting some sort of weird side money coming in. That's cool. With Saturn there, what I will say is maintain that intention to save. I wouldn't be spending too much too crazy. Now, there might be a weird expense that also winds up arising. And if you need to replace something, number one, top recommendation here from me about that is, if you can at all put it off, if you can borrow a replacement from someone for a little bit and then buy a replacement in a couple months, I would go that way. Just because, again, there's something that if you're making a big purchase, you're going to miss something for sure. We've got too much miscommunication and a lack of understanding about the value of something with these two going retrograde in specifically these houses. But if you absolutely have to buy something, read everything. Make sure that you are 100% clear. Don't let someone be pushy and not answer your questions about something or make you feel like your questions are silly. Be, like this says, speak your mind boldly and authentically. If you have a question, make sure that gets answered before you exchange any money. But yeah, ultimately, I think that is pretty much a lot of what I wanted to cover for you, Aquarius Rising. I hope that it is a wonderful month for you, and I will talk to you soon. All right, so finally for Pisces rising here, we have a lunar eclipse taking place in your seventh house of partnerships and close relationships and other people. We have a big pile up in your first house of yourself and how you approach people, how you come off to people, and so on. And we also then have a solar eclipse in your second house of finances, resources, security, income, self worth, so on. And we also then have Venus and Mercury going retrograde in the second house back into your first house. And then at the very end of the month, we have Neptune coming from that first house into the second. So these houses are very tied in together, and we'll talk about what that means for sure. But let's start with this lunar eclipse in the seventh house. Now, to have a lunar eclipse, it does orient toward releasing, letting things go. And the south node does as well. So one thing that's nice about having a lunar eclipse on the south node is there's not a ton of confusion about what it's actually going to bring. This is a shedding away of something that is not quite working for you. And it's probably, especially looking at this action over here, these two houses and then this one, they play into each other in a really strong way. There's probably something about people pleasing or trying to be what other people are wanting for you to be, trying to keep someone else happy with your actions, or realizing that you prioritize other people and their needs and wants and expectations above yours. And there needing to be a major reorientation around that. Now, you're going to get a lot of opportunities along these lines in the coming year and a half, because this is only our first Virgo eclipse that we're dealing with. We have more coming, but it's arising as a thing that you're thinking about in a very substantial way around this time. There may even be some major movement in that way. So a very straightforward example would be if there's a relationship that you feel is very nitpicky and you feel like someone's boxing you in and it's having an impact then on your own self-image, then this could be you deciding to take a step back from that relationship. Maybe back burner that relationship a bit. I do need to point out there's something that I am thinking is going to be a big thing for a lot of people. And because of how this is lining up in your chart, I definitely need to point this out for you. On the day after this lunar eclipse is ruled by Mercury because it's in Virgo. The day after, Mercury goes retrograde. So I would caution around cutting someone out entirely or making any decisions around your relationships that preclude future flexibility along those lines. Like you could wind up cutting someone out in an emotionally kind of reactive way under this influence for sure. And then you could realize the next day, oh my God, that person was the one who was going to help me with this thing that I really need. And that may sound a little bit transactional, but it's like, man, if I had just allowed some flexibility in the situation or just taken a bit of a step back and think things through, then I might be in a better position right now. There's something regretful about that Mercury going retrograde the day after a total eclipse that it's ruling, so something to keep in mind. I would try to go soft on results right now and let things play out for a couple of months and settle in before making sharp decisions that you can't go back on. So yeah, the lunar eclipse in Virgo is lighting up your partnership sector, urging you to release codependent patterns or relationships that no longer serve your growth. Now, this might not be a specific relationship. It could be, like I was saying, a pattern around people pleasing, around codependency, around putting other people's needs or desires or whatever above your own. and releasing along those lines. Often that is the way that eclipses play out, is that they're actually much more personal than they are necessarily out in the world events and things like this. So yeah, focus on building connections rooted in mutual respect and support. And again, we have the solar eclipse then taking place in your second house of finances, income, resources, and also your own personal self-worth. So there should be opportunities for income that wind up arising. This may be an area that feels a little bit hard to get your hands on completely, like to get a complete grip of, okay, what is this going to look like in 6 months? And am I able to see 100% what that's going to look like in between, because of those retrogrades that are coming up? You may find yourself having a new income that you are spinning up around this time. If there are some delays along those lines, I would not stress about it. Venus and Mercury going retrograde in that house just before that eclipse would, to me, say, if it were me, I would expect that things are going to take a little while, that they're going to take probably a couple months before they really get off the ground. So again, that's another thing. If you have a side hustle that you're quite confident in, I would not tell you not to be confident in it, but I would not leap based on a specific short-term period of time of the returns that you're getting on quitting a job quite yet. I would give something like that some time for these retrogrades to sort themselves out. We're about to get a bunch of planets changing signs and doing little weird things. So I would just give it a little bit of time, as much as you can, and maybe if there's a job that is frustrating to you and maybe even makes you feel a little bit weird about yourself, this could be bringing then up an opportunity for you to work on understanding when there are unhealthy people around, that it's not like it's your fault if it bothers you or anything like that. I think that's completely nuts. But we do have some control over how much we allow for that to impact our own internal perspective on ourselves. And so you could be challenged here to work on something like that before you take that leap, before you're able to, like I said, with that being the first Virgo full moon here, eclipse, this can just be kind of getting the ball rolling along those lines. So Venus and Mercury going retrograde. Of course, we're going to be dealing with the standard Mercury retrograde annoyances, miscommunications, misunderstandings, emails you thought you sent but didn't, text that you didn't mean to send that you did, all sorts of weird little things along these lines, but also rethinking things a lot as well. This can have you reconsidering decisions that you have already made. That's why I said try not to make a sharp decision right before, because there's something weird about that Mercury going retrograde the day after that eclipse. But also with Venus going retrograde in this house, Venus also has to do with finances and values and self-worth and even the health of relationships and things like that as well, and how we see ourselves. And this can therefore have you rethinking and revaluing up how you feel about your own value, the value of you, just straight up, And so then that is moving into your first house of yourself and your personality. You may be kind of trying this on a bit. You may be kind of realizing that there's something that doesn't serve you, that you've been taking on as a belief about yourself and that you've been caging yourself in with. And so therefore trying on intentionally and consciously not believing that, trying really hard to create a new pattern for yourself, to recondition yourself along these lines, You just recently have had Pluto move into your 12th house. So it's likely that there's going to be a lot of subconscious patterns that you're recognizing that you didn't even know were there. So this is likely also playing into something along those lines. Now, also then at the very end of the month, Neptune will be moving into your second house. So this could have you, for instance, the side hustle example, this could have you pursuing a form of income that is more in alignment with you, that you feel makes more sense to you, possibly / probably more independent in terms of that income source, that income flow. It could be an additional one, but one thing, like I alluded to, when you're working for yourself, to keep in mind is the ebbs and the flows. And that's one thing that Neptune always brings up too. And so that'll be something to consider for the years to come, is that a good year isn't always followed by an even better year. So when you have those good years, do try and sock some away for any sort of little downturns that, have an impact, to make sure that you are fully shored up. That way you don't need to then, for instance, if if you do wind up going independent, that you don't then need to go back into the workforce and distract yourself from what it is that you're doing. So it has you very optimistic and idealistic, but it can also have you wearing some rose-colored glasses about income and just kind of expecting for things to continue to go well when they are. So something to keep in mind. But yeah, so that solar eclipse in Aries is energizing your sector of self-worth and finances, bringing opportunities to reset your relationship with money and abundance. And then additionally, Pisces season is highlighting your identity, your personal goals, how you carry yourself, how you approach people. Step into your power, embrace your dreams, and trust that you're entering a powerful new chapter. The world is ready to see the real you. And I also need to point out to you, we are not getting a Pisces eclipse quite this time, but we're going to be getting several of them coming up. I can tell you that on September 7th, we're getting a total lunar eclipse in Pisces. And then again, next August, so August of 2026, we're getting another lunar eclipse in Pisces. So your sense of identity, your sense of who you are, your motivations, your purpose, how it is that you go about things, how it is that you approach people, that is coming up in a very important way in the coming years. So I would definitely take advantage of all the action that's going to be going on along this cusp here to really shore up your sense of security in yourself, your sense of your ability to rely on and trust yourself, and your sense of self-worth as well. And try your best to feed that into how you present yourself as well, so that maybe you don't run into people who help to keep you in a pattern of codependency or of putting others above yourself and things like that, which is a very, very, very natural thing for someone with really any substantial Pisces, but certainly Pisces Rising is very capable of. But yeah, I think that is mostly what I wanted to cover. I'm going to go in the next video into Neptune in Aries sign by sign. So I'll be talking about it in your second house. If that's something that you want to know more about, I'll be publishing about that very soon. That's why I didn't go super into it this time. But yeah, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful month, and I will see you soon. And yeah, that is everything that I have for you all for March 2025 horoscopes for the signs. I want to thank you so much for being here. And if you don't mind hitting the thumbs up button, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps the channel to grow. And if you are interested in content like this, do remember to subscribe if you are interested in that. And finally, thank you so, so, so much To the members of this channel, I am so grateful to you. Much love to you guys. Angel Niblock, Patrick McKenney, Startlingly True, Deborah Keel Levitt, Gary A., Stacy Bergener, I think I'm going to go with Bergener, Michelle Howell, JJ Jody, C. Rezer, Anne Marie, Lynn Newman, and peace out. Thank you again so much for your support. I am very, very grateful for it. And yeah, I will see everyone in the next video for Neptune in Aries through the signs. Be good. Bye.